Hello and welcome to the Trail and Adventure Motorbike Podcast with me, Clive Barber, and my good mate, Noel Tom. For the days when you can't ride your bike, there's always the Trail and Adventure Motorbike Podcast. Back when Noel and I started to get into trail riding, adventure riding and all this kind of malarkey, YouTube didn't exist. The only way you were going to find out about people doing similar stuff was either in magazines or books. And one of the originators of adventure motorcycle travel books was Sam Manicom. It's taken a while, but we're absolutely delighted to welcome Sam onto the podcast for the first and hopefully not the last time. I think there's a number of episodes in talking to Sam. We've barely scratched the surface in this episode, but I think you're going to enjoy it. Right, let's get on with it. There's 8 years to cover. Thanks a million for joining us, Sam. Sam Manicom, you are one of the OG, as the young people say, motorbike world travellers, certainly for our generation anyway. You're up there with the likes of Austin Vince and people like that who...
It's a big deal.
I don't know about that. Let's talk about Austin for a bit, because he is a big deal. He's a fascinating bloke, isn't he? I have a huge amount of respect when you think about what he did and how he did it and how many thousands of people he and the guys have influenced over the years. I love the whole concept of them getting people thinking, well, actually... if a raving lunatic like Austin Vince can do this, then blooming hell, I should be able to do it as well.
You're up there as far as I'm concerned, Sam. You are, you're part of that pantheon of early motorcycle travellers. And I guess the thing is, Austin made films. They kept that diary, which turned into a book. But you've also written the 4 books that document your travels, which are pretty seminal, and everybody should read them. I think your first book was your first trip around Africa, into Africa. There's Under Asian Skies, which is Australia, Australasia and Asia. Distant Suns, South America, and Tortillas to Totems, which was Mexico and North America, I think, wasn't it?
That's right. Mexico, USA and Canada. That actually was the working title for that book, because normally I'll just sort of bounce an idea out when I'm writing, and there's a working title for the book. And as the book develops, because I've got no idea really how it's going to work or what themes or threads are going to happen, it's all just done from memory and then going back to my diaries for the facts and the people's faces and how things smelt and all of those other things that bring words to life. And at the end of writing that book, I didn't have a clue about what to call it. But the working title had been From Tortillas to Totems, because that's where I was travelling, from tortillas in Mexico up to totems in Canada. Elspeth Beard and I were talking about it. I said to her, come on, we've talked endless hours in your tower about this section of the journey, because, it's like travellers get together and we're all swapping stories and yarns and all of that sort of thing. And I said to her, come on, help me come up with an idea for this book. And she said, no, Tortillas to Totems is great. And I said, yeah, but can you imagine being at a book signing at a motorcycle show, the NEC, Motorcycle Live, for example, and 50 times a day you're saying Tortillas to Totems? I said, I'm going to muck it up somewhere. I can't call the book that. And she said, yes, you can. She's so right. I think probably the worst title of all of the books is Distant Suns, because that's Southern Africa and South America. They're in the same book because they're the same latitude, but they are totally different to each other. The whole thing of wildlife and landscapes and customs and cultures and so on, it's bookends of the travel world. What do you call a book about South America and Southern Africa? South? Well, that doesn't mean anything. And so one romantic evening over too many glasses of wine, I was thinking, yeah, it was so nice travelling underneath those suns down there. And that was it. It just popped up as Distant Suns.
As you're riding along, you're not continuously trying to think of titles?
As I'm riding, no, because when I did the trip, I had no intention of writing books at all. I just went to try and not fall off too many times and to learn and to ride and all of the rest of it. The books came about at a much later stage.
When you set off, you didn't have a huge amount of motorcycling experience, is that right?
I passed my motorcycle test in 6 weeks, and the whole decision to ride down through Africa was as a result of too many beers, actually.
No such thing.
I got back from a backpacking trip, and I was on the road for 3 years with that one. My mother said, don't you think it's time to grow up now? And I'd been on so many trips, I thought, well, yeah, okay, maybe I should try a career, see what happens with that.
How old were you when your mum said that to you?
Mid-30s, mid to late 30s, something like that. So I tried the career and I seemed to do quite well at it. But there was always the itch happening. My feet were itching, and I guess having done a fair few trips before, I just knew the pure fun, the magic of travel, getting out on the road and seeing and experiencing and learning and all of the rest of it. One night I was in the pub after work and I was sitting thinking about life, the world and everything as you do. I suddenly realised that I didn't like my job at all anymore. And that started me thinking even harder. Okay, well, a few more beers later. But hang on a minute. You're in a really fortunate position. You don't owe anybody any money. Your family are well. You've got no kids. You've got no pets. You don't owe anybody any money at all. You've got some savings. You may never be this free again. Do something now. What are you going to do? It was the 7th beer that had me think, I'm going to ride a motorcycle through Africa. So I handed my notice in the next morning. Bought a little 125 KDX Kawasaki at lunchtime. Passed my test 6 weeks later. 2 weeks after that, I was on to an R80 GS BMW. I celebrated my 3-month anniversary on a motorcycle at the edge of the Sahara, looking south, thinking, Sam, you're a total and utter idiot. What are you doing?
Is it true that you picked the R80 because a bloke down the pub told you it was bulletproof and best of all, idiot-proof?
That was actually 2 blokes, and it was the very same pub that I was drinking too much beer in that night. And I was in the pub telling my mates that I was going to do this, and you can imagine the scene. They were just cracked up laughing because they knew my experience on a motorcycle was virtually zero. But there were 2 guys sitting on the table next door to us, and they'd been earwigging on the conversation, which wasn't difficult, because we were being a little bit loud. And after a while, one of them said, come on, the Sahara, you're going to cross the Sahara. You can't go across there in the midst of the summer. You've got the clock ticking on you. What bike are you going to take? And I said, I don't know. Look at the table was covered with motorcycle magazines, and there weren't that many at the time who were doing overlandery type stories, but they were talking about ADV motorcycles like the XT500 and the DR650 and bikes like that. I said to the guy, well, this blue one looks quite nice. Maybe I'll go on that. Of course, the 2 of them and my mates cracked up laughing. He said, forget that. Take an R80 GS. It's absolutely bulletproof. And then his mate leant round and said, yeah, blooming idiot proof. And also I thought I'll have one of those. What a fortunate meeting that was. I was so lucky because that bike was absolutely phenomenal. It was very, very forgiving to a novice. Oh, it got me out of an awful lot of trouble over the years.
And were you mechanically competent before you set off? Or
no, not at all.
You
not
hadn't done
at
anything,
all.
Right?
No. My father was a boffin, and therefore I didn't grow up doing anything practical except for painting and decorating and woodwork, which I loved. Now, still give me a piece of wood and I'll make you something nice. But back then, spanners, torque wrenches, what on earth's that? All of these sorts of things, I didn't have a clue. So it was literally a case of picking people's brains and getting a toolkit together that seemed pretty respectable. I mean, the one that came with the bike from BMW, that was supposed to be able to tick all of the boxes. It didn't, but it ticked most of them. And then I paid a BMW dealership to teach me how to do the oil changes, the air filter change, and the valve clearances. I think I sort of kind of understood, but I also bought a Haynes manual. The lessons that I had with BMW were great because they meant that I wasn't looking at double Dutch on the pages. My attitude was very much as I rode. If something went wrong and I couldn't repair it by sitting by the side of the roads with my manual and my spanners and swapping bits, hoping that something made it work, then I'd put the bike on a truck and that'd be a new adventure beginning. I'd get to know the truck and the truck driver. I'd get to know his life. It would be fascinating seeing part of Africa from up there rather than down in the dirt. And I would find a garage with somebody who knew a little bit about motorcycle mechanicking. And that was actually quite a good thing from the point of view of having chosen the BMW. One of the reasons that clinched it for me was because when I started reading about them after the guys in the pub, I found out that quite a few of the police forces in Africa used airhead BMWs. And I thought, right, well, okay, if I get really stuck, then maybe I can hunt out a police force and have a word with their mechanic and see what the score would be. I never had to because the bike was phenomenal.
So interesting that you recognised that point in your life where you were debt-free, no kids, that was the perfect moment to set off. I think so many people, myself included, perhaps, go past that point without even realising that it's happened.
Have you got some secret kids, Noel?
No. age more than anything. I was just preoccupied with getting somewhere to live and hanging on to a job and all the things I probably shouldn't have been preoccupied with.
People say to me that I'm incredibly lucky and that I am very fortunate, but the luck came because I was sitting in the pub that night and I drank too many beers, and it got those grey cells tinging and thinking, yeah, why not? One of the things that I love about having travelled so much over the years is I've learnt the lesson, if you don't try something, you never know if you can. And I love that attitude, approaching things that I'd never had a go again. I may fall flat on my face and I may make a complete and utter idiot of myself. But, well, sometimes you try something that you don't think you've got the skills or the knowledge base to do. And all of a sudden you find, this is just awesome. I'm so glad I had a go.
You'd done a bit of travelling, Sam, before you decided to set off on a motorbike. Were there any motorcycle travellers back then that you knew of that inspired you to jump on a motorbike, or was it just a beer-induced idea?
The trip on a motorcycle came about because I'd sailed, I'd backpacked, I'd hitchhiked, I'd bussed and trained, I'd bought a beaten-up old station wagon in Australia and blatted around in that for a while, and those sorts of things. So I was thinking about a different way to travel, a new set of experiences. When I was young, my parents had banned me from the whole thought of motorcycling, and they were probably right, because I was one of those kids who would have been the one in the hedge on the corner because I'd gone around it a bit too fast to see how fast I could go around it. So I think they were absolutely very, very sane with that. But there was a bit of naughtiness in my thought because I'd been banned. Well, okay, I'm grown up now. Why don't I have a go? But as far as inspirations is concerned, I spent a summer working on the island of Corfu. One of the jobs that I had was waiting on tables in a restaurant in a little village called Cassiope. I actually had 3 jobs. One job during the daytime working on the beach, the evening job waiting on tables, and then again taking on that if you don't try, you won't find it if you can. I ended up as DJ in the disco, which was just completely pods. It was just full-on party zone. You know what it's like. You go on holiday and you're there to have fun, so you can imagine the atmosphere. Some of my customers, they became regulars, and after, I suppose, about the 5th or 6th night, sitting at one of my tables, they said to me, have you heard of a guy called Ted Simon? And I said, no, I haven't got a clue. Who's he? And they said, well, Ted's a friend of ours. He brought a book out about motorcycling around the world. We think you and he are probably kindred spirits. Would you like us to send his book out to you? I said, well, thank you very much. That's really nice of you. And didn't think about it anymore after that point because motorcycling just wasn't in my mind at all. To my surprise, 6 weeks later, in the post arrived Jupiter's Travels. I read it and I thought, what a fascinating book. What an interesting guy. I love his way of travelling. His attitude fits in so well with the sorts of things that I think, and then put it down and gave it away to somebody else and carried on working my way through the summer, trying to earn enough money to go to Australia. Didn't think about it again for another perhaps decade. It was only when I had made the decision that I was going to ride through Africa that somebody said, have you read Ted's book? And so I dug out a copy and reread it and thought, oh, yeah, this is absolutely fascinating.
Here's a question I never thought I'd ask Sam Manicom. Did you have a DJ name?
We'll be back after a quick break.
Mental Health Motorbike is a free mental health first aid support charity for the motorbike community throughout the UK. We exist to create meaningful and purposeful opportunities for all bikers so that together we can grow the well-being of the biker community. We do this through one-to-one and peer support, events, training activities and projects, working in partnership with the industry, organisations and clubs. When life gets tough, we are here to support, to listen, to ride, to get some support. You can find more information at mhmotorbike.com. Are you a fan of the thought, if you don't try, you'll never find out if you can? Then you will love Sam Manicom's 4 motorcycle travel books. With just 3 months' experience on a motorcycle, Sam arrived at the edge of the Sahara, aiming to ride the length of Africa. This dramatic 1-year journey turned into an 8-year adventure around the world. Starting with Into Africa, with the word pictures that bring good travel books to life, Sam's 4- and 5-star rated books take you riding and exploring with him, and then Birgit too, through each section of the journey. With laughter, at times tears, and frequently with pure awe, Sam shares just what it's like to travel the world. In the gritty bits, you'll feel the grit. You can order signed copies directly from Sam on sam-manicom.com, or you can buy copies from your local bookshop or Amazon. The 4 books: Into Africa, Under Asian Skies, Distant Suns, which is South America, and Tortillas to Totem, which covers his journeys through Mexico and North America. The 4 books are also available on Kindle and as audiobooks from Spotify, iTunes, and Audible.
Oh, I can't possibly tell you that because it was too ridiculous, and it sounds a lot better when we've all been drinking a lot.
Just to give us an idea of the time, what was your sort of go-to tune to get people up?
It was all 80s music.
Well, that's our era, Sam. We'll know it.
I had a friend in the UK who was a DJ. We'd become friends because he'd actually eaten in that restaurant right at the beginning of the season. When I had the chance of getting this job, I wrote to him and said, look, I haven't got a clue what I'm doing. What music is good? I've been backpacking and travelling and sleeping on beaches and all of those sorts of things. I didn't really know anything about what was hot on the music scene. So he put a compilation cassette together and sent it out to me. So I persuaded the owner of the restaurant and nightclub to buy a cassette player so that I could use this thing. It just went from there, and he sent me out a couple more cassettes during the course of the summer. It was brilliant fun.
Well, I'm looking forward to your set at ABR this year then.
That would be great, do it. I wanted to ask, because presumably you have met Mr. Ted Simon.
Absolutely, many times.
And you've had the joy of telling him this story. What did he think of that?
He said, I think I know who you're talking about.
It's virtually impossible to sum up a whole continent, Sam, but tell us something about your travels through Africa, and were there any surprises or glorious things that particularly spring to mind about travelling through Africa?
Africa is a constant flow of surprises. It's very difficult to preconceive and to anticipate. There's a lot of travel gold as you travel down through this continent. A lot of people still think about it as being the dark continent. And even now, where you've got so much access through people's blogs and social media posts and so on. Back in 1992, there was none of this. And a lot of it was researched by going to the library and reading books and getting maps out. And Michelin maps then were the best maps, and they still are the best maps now. Just going with an open mind, and I think that that's still valid now. Go with an open mind in spite of everything that you can find online. Now, somebody said to me once, I don't really know why you bother because it's all been done before. And I sort of screeched to a halt in my tracks, led those little heel skid marks on the pavement and said to him, but hang on a minute, nobody has ever done the trip that I did. Nobody's ever going to do that trip again, and I will never do a trip that somebody else did. Because everything can be different. The roads that you decide to ride, the political situation, what happens with the weather, serendipity, the opportunities that suddenly arrive in front of you. And Africa is a continent that is full of opportunity. It's just that you've got to be traveling slow enough and with your eyes open wide enough to see those opportunities. Being such a novice motorcyclist going down through Africa, one of the key things that I learned was how amazing side turnings are. By travelling slowly, you see those side turnings and you've got enough time to look down them and think, that looks interesting. I wonder what's down there. Let's go and have a look. You're not stuck with a bus or a train ticket which says you have to be at X point to get on a train, and then you're burning past things that you think, whoa, that looked interesting, and it's gone, and you can't go back for it. The freedom that a motorcycle gives you. In Africa, you can't ride more than a few miles without seeing something else that's just spectacular. An example of that was going into Ethiopia. I met an English couple, Mike and Sally, on the ferry going from Piraeus in Greece to Alexandria in Egypt. There were 50 motorcycles on this ferry, and I was a little bit gobsmacked when I rolled into the car deck and saw all these bikes, because I'd sort of been thinking, because I'd never heard of anybody doing anything like this, that I was doing something that was really unusual. Well, I was. Mike and Sally were the only ones out of that bunch of motorcyclists who were going further south from Egypt. So we naturally linked up, and for me that was very fortunate because Mike was a hugely experienced motocross rider, so I learnt a lot from riding with them. And I think Sally was nervous, but very reassured because she knew how skilled a rider Mike was. And if I was thinking I could do it, then, well, it wasn't going to be that bad, was it? So Mike and I, and Sally and I, we'd rolled into Ethiopia, and the 20-year civil war had just finished there. So there were lots of guns around, burned out tanks, and the air was quite tense, and we were riding into villages and people were running away from us and hiding. And they were doing so because they'd never seen anything like us before, and they'd spent the last 20 years with a shoot first, ask questions after environment. Just because we were gentle and we were respectful and handshakes and smiles and just taking our time and not being aggressive, we were doing okay. And it was actually a fascinating insight to the darker side of Africa. This was much lower down where it was hotter, and as we started to climb up into the plateaus, yes, we were still finding the burned out armoured personnel carriers, and there were mine warning signs, and yeah, if you needed a pee, you didn't go to the bushes. You just did it where you stood by the side of the bike, because that was the only sane and sensible thing to do. But when we got up into the pure farmland up on the plateau, which was much cooler, we started to see horses and horsemen, and some of these guys were riding with just absolute pride. One guy just jumps instantly into my mind. He was riding what looked like a jet black thoroughbred. His outfit was the same sort of clothes that you would expect to see on a gondolier in Venice. So, you know, the little jacket with all of the embroidery on it, and then the flat-brimmed hat. And he was riding with one hand on his hip and the other hand on the reins. And the reins and the bridles were covered in little woolen pom-poms, pink and white and red. And they were just sort of jingling up and down as he was going. And we were just cruising along gently. It was a gravelly road. And I heard through my helmet and over the sound of my bike's engine, the sound of a horse galloping. And I looked right, and this rider was keeping up with me. And he just flashed me this huge grin. And so I grinned back at him, open face helmet, and he gave me a thumbs up. And that was it. The race was on. And here and I just hammered across the landscape as fast as we both possibly could, grinning at each other as we went. And to me, this is one of those travel gold moments. The things that happen to you when you're on the open road and you just think, yeah, let's see what happens. One other example, rolling into the ex-capital of Ethiopia. Ethiopia used to be called Abyssinia, and it was run by, royal family. And up in the cool, there's a town called, or a small city called Gondar. The royal family used to live there. The castles that they built back in the days when we in the UK were still living in mud huts were very much like the Normans subsequently built in the UK out of stone. And I had no idea that I was going to find that.
Just for younger listeners, because it's really hard to imagine now, isn't it? Riding along, not just staring at a sat-nav the whole time and checking your route. You were just traveling with paper. How often in the day, I mean, even I've forgotten how I used to do it, but I've forgotten. Did I just sort of stop every half an hour and look at the map, or were you just sort of using the sun most of the day and then occasionally just checking to see where you were and if you were off course? Was there much map reading on the hoof, if you like?
The map reading tended to happen the night before. When I was travelling with Mike and Sally, we would sit and we would work out where we wanted to go next. We were in part planning the route because we were asking the locals, is it all right to go that way? And the locals were either saying to us, yeah, sure, it's absolutely fine, or, okay, but if you go through that town, you maybe just don't want to stop. Those sorts of things. The old days pre-sat-nav where you would have a strip of paper and in capital letters you would write a list of all of the different places that you wanted to go. The Michelin map was there and that list was running down the side. You're quite right about using the sun. Absolutely superb compass. I still walk now everywhere, conscious of where the sun is, and that keeps me heading roughly in the right direction. Even on cloudy days, you get this sensation of where the sun is, don't you?
It's a lost art, I think, isn't it? Just looking for road signs and memorising a route to a certain degree.
It would basically look like I'm travelling from Coventry to Glasgow. I would make a note of all the towns and the cities on the way. It's fairly easy in the UK. You just follow the signs, don't you, to the next city, and then you follow the sign to the next city.
Oh, absolutely. There's two stories that I want to tell you there, if I may. And the first is, I got lost a lot, but I had my bike. I had a good 400 miles range of fuel if I was jogging along at a gentle pace, and most of the time it really didn't matter. In Ethiopia it did, because the war had just finished. So, you'd roll into a town and there might be 3 or 4 petrol stations, but none of them had any fuel. So I was very happy that I had that extra fuel capacity there. But even in other places, so long as I've got half a fuel tank, if I get lost, I'm really not bothered. But it's part of the unexpected that I love. And I use a sat-nav now. but I still use maps. For me, a route planned on a map means that I'm seeing what's to the sides, and I'm seeing those quirky little town names, or I'm seeing an escarpment because of the contour lines, and I'm thinking, well, there's got to be a cracking view from there. I wonder if I can get up there. And so, the maps are giving me the opportunity to see all of those sorts of things. SatNav's great, but I like the freedom of that. Just going back to what you were saying about town names, my books are out in audiobooks. And one of the reasons for that is because at Motorcycle Live, I would be quite often standing talking to somebody who'd stopped and was looking at my paperbacks, and we'd talk about the stories and the things that had happened. And after 15 minutes, that person may well say to me, yeah, well, that's great. It's really interesting. But I can't read books. My first thought, because this happened multiple times, was, cool, what standard of education have we got in this country nowadays that people get to his age and he can't read books? And then it slowly dawned on me that actually there might be a medical issue going on. The next time this happened to me, I prompted the guy a little bit. He said, I'm a raging dyslexic. I love motorcycling, but I can't read hardly at all. And so I can't read books. And I said, but how do you navigate? And he said, well, my wife's brilliant. She does the navigating for me. Then we started talking about this list of town names. And he said, my wife draws me one of those pieces of paper. Instead of the letters of a name of a place, align the length of the words that I'm supposed to be looking at with an LT. I can read LT. So when I get to a really long name, I know I've got to turn left there. And that was how he was navigating. And it was that conversation that made me think, I want to have a go at doing an audiobook, because then I can share with people who battle with reading.
This reminds me a little bit of me watching Wimbledon. I do not understand tennis scoring, and for years I've just watched tennis and enjoyed it. I know the end's coming by the sound of the crowd, not by the scoring. Match point means nothing to me, but I know the crowd are getting a little bit cheated up, so we could be getting to the end of this particular game.
There's a big difference, though. People with dyslexia have like a learning disability. You're just a fucking idiot.
That was cruel.
As technologies come along, I mean, you bet you've embraced it.
That's motorcycling, isn't it? Opportunities arise, and we need to take a look at them and pick out the things that we want to do. I think we're incredibly lucky now, aren't we, with all of the things that we can make our own. Building a motorcycle to suit us now as individuals is just fantastic, isn't it? The suspension games that we can play, and the luggage and the sat-navs and all of the intercoms and all of those sorts of things. How wonderful.
Do you use an intercom when you travel with Birgit?
I do. I used to write for various magazines, and one of the things that I did was product reviews. In the early days of intercoms, there were some pretty ropey affairs around. They weren't very good, and voice recognition tended to suck, so on and so on. Anyway, Birgit and I were out doing a test on one of these, and she was muttering in my helmet through the hiss and the crackle that she wasn't enjoying the experience at all. And every so often it would just cut out and we'd lose each other totally, even though we were still relatively close. Or it would voice activate because of a change of head direction, and therefore the breeze underneath the helmet. And then it would just sort of be rattling noise in her helmet. We pulled up at some traffic lights. They were on red. She pulled her helmet off. She ripped the intercom out, threw it on the ground, put her helmet back on. The lights changed green and she left. So for many years after that, she was, I don't want to use an intercom.
I've come close to that when we've got different brands of intercom and you just can't get them to talk to each other. It can't get, so I share her rage.
We do use one now, though, and some friends finally persuaded her that it was an excellent idea. And she said, well, all right, if the technology is that much better, then let's have a go. So I got a set of Cardo, and we've been going through the various different stages of, and they've just been absolutely fantastic.
You must look back at earlier trips now and think they were great trips, but imagine if we'd had intercoms when we were going through that village and looking for the right way through it and been able to communicate as we went. It would have been an absolute game changer.
For the first 4 years, I pretty much travelled on my own. Maybe a week here or a week there with other people, and there was the first few months with Mike and Sally, but after that was pretty much on my own. And so I really didn't feel the need for an intercom at all. But when Birgit and I started travelling together, then I started to think it would be quite useful because her riding ability was completely different to my own. I would have been able to feel a lot more comfortable with her if I'd been able to know what was going on instead of having to stare in my rearview mirror all of the time. And that's another story. Now, it is absolutely fantastic to travel together with an intercom. And as you say, being in cities with manic traffic and just being able to communicate and just come on, look at that view, we've got to stop, or I'm busting for a pee, or whatever else it may be. It is really nice. Before we travelled with intercoms, one of the things that was a complete joy at the end of the day was putting the kettle on and sitting wherever we were, sometimes with this awesome view out over this rolling landscape, and just be talking through what had happened during the day. And because we hadn't been communicating so much during the day, I was always amazed at what she'd seen that I hadn't, and vice versa. It was double whammy.
You go through the did you sees, don't you? And quite often there is you didn't see that. It was right in front of us. It ran out in front of you.
Getting back to Africa, Sam, it wasn't always plain sailing.
It wasn't.
Fairly horrendous incidents in your first book. Possibly the most terrifying one was the first time you ended up in prison.
Yes. It's still the scariest moment of my life. And you just starting talking about it, and all the hair on my arm has just gone, stood straight up. It still affects me like that. It's a long story, so I'll keep it short.
Dear listener, if you want to hear the full story, then buy Sam's first... In fact, buy all of Sam's books. They're available on Audible and various other places too.
I was riding with an American friend on the back of my bike, and he was the first proper pillion that I'd had on the bike, and 6'4" tall, short dreadlocks, and a mad sense of humour. Absolutely brilliant pillion passenger, and he and I had ridden from Nairobi down through the rest of Kenya and through Tanzania. And we were pulling into one of the last towns in Tanzania. A man stepped out in front and I hit him very hard. Unfortunately, there was just no way that I could get out of his way. The police charged me with speeding, driving without due care and attention, and attempt to commit grievous bodily harm. So they charged me with driving at him on purpose. I was thrown into a jail cell once I'd finished the booking in, and that was a freaky situation all on its own. The booking in room was just full. You can imagine an almost chest-high counter with police officers sitting behind it, and the space in front is just a heaving mass of people.
What was going through your mind at this point, Sam? Were you imagining like a 10-year sentence in some horrendous jail, or were you just thinking, I really didn't do anything wrong, I should be able to get away with this? What was going on in your head at this point?
A large amount of disbelief that it was happening to me. You know those moments in life where you suddenly feel that you're actually a fly high up on the wall and you're watching down on a scene that you're involved with, but it doesn't feel like you're involved in it. That was me. I was up there on the wall watching all of this going on. And it was fairly horrific because a man was thrown into the middle of the crowd by one of the police officers, and he had blood coming out of his nose, his eyes and his ears, and he was covered in bruises. And you could see even, with the black man, that he was badly beaten up. And I was thinking, this just can't be real. I was also mostly concerned by the fact that my bike had been confiscated, as had my passport, carnet de passage, my money, traveller's checks. Pretty much everything had been taken. Of course, you hear all of the stories about people having stuff confiscated by the officials and never seeing anything back. So all of that was whirling around in my mind, at the same time as wondering what on earth had happened to the man that I'd hit. When I'd finished booking in and signed my statement, which in short was, it wasn't my fault, the man stepped out in front of me, I couldn't miss him, and no, I wasn't going too fast, that would have been ridiculous in the crowded situations, and of course I was paying attention. I was taken by the scruff of the neck and thrown into a jail cell. It was pitch black in there, except for the light from a small window which was high up on the wall. I suppose it was probably about a foot square, and it was barred. So there's one single beam of light coming down into the cell. It stunk in there. Absolutely awful. As my eyes got used to the gloom and I realised that there were 20 other guys in there and that the bucket was the toilet, that was when what was going on really started to hit home. And yeah, I was scared. Really scared. One of the guys in the cell decided that he really liked the look of me, and let's put it this way, you hear the stories of what happened to people when they're in prison. That looked as if it was about to happen to me, but fortunately my instincts took over. You know how things turn into slow motion when you're suddenly in a situation that's actually really scary? It's almost like the brain has the ability to slow things down so that you have the time to think and to cope and to react. And that's exactly what happened to me. I'd already made my way so that I'd pushed some space so that my back was against the wall because I was afraid of somebody doing something from behind. And I just grabbed the two guys who were next door to me and I was pummeling them against the wall, shouting and guard at the top of my voice, just trying to draw attention to something, to somebody who might be walking in a corridor. And this stopped the guy who was coming towards me dead in his tracks. And the bizarre thing was, he stopped right in this single beam of light from that little window high up on the wall. It was almost like a B-movie spotlight of the villain. That went in my mind at that moment too. Mind's a funny thing, isn't it? But I was very fortunate because there was a police officer who was walking down the corridor and he heard me shouting and came bursting into the room, took one look at what was going on and grabbed me and just yanked me out and threw me into a cell on my own. And yeah, I think I had an incredibly fortunate escape there.
Do you ever have sort of dreams about it now?
No.
Yes, nightmares, not dreams.
No, it was living a nightmare. Do you know, I'm a great believer in silver linings. I know that every time something goes badly wrong, then something brilliant is going to happen as a direct result. And quite often, brilliant things are going to happen as a direct result. And it could be the people that you meet. It could be the places that you find yourself that you wouldn't have found yourself ordinarily. It could be the huge strokes of luck or a learning curve that you would never have experienced. One of the silver linings for me was that a local man, a retired captain from the Tanzanian army, who had seen the accident and had come in and been interpreting for me every day, his pension from the Tanzanian army was £20 sterling a year. He put his farm up as bail for me.
Yeah.
What a phenomenal thing that was to have happened.
A complete stranger as well.
But it was also meeting some children near the bus station. Africa, for many people, has the reputation of being a continent where everybody's hands are out for aid money and that they're lazy and they don't really try. That is so far from the truth for the greater percentage of people. Most Africans that I met are full of pride, don't want help and want to make it work for themselves. I met some kids by the bus station in this town who I would have just ridden on past and not even known that they were there. These kids were orphans. No money, nobody looking after them except for themselves. And they had set up a little stall next door to the bus station, and half of the kids each day would go out along the roads approaching the town and they would collect up shredded rubber retreads from trucks and buses. In that heat, you can imagine that the retreads would peel off quite often. They would carry them back to the little stall that they've made, and there, using knives that they'd made themselves out of scrap metal and kept sharpened themselves, they would carve up these truck tyres, these shredded retreads, and make bushes to go on truck and bus panels to stop them vibrating and various other things. And that was how they made their living, by collecting up this rubber, carving them into bushes, and then selling them. And these kids were some of the most amazing characters that you could ever wish to meet. Just so funny. But to me, that's a silver lining. If I hadn't had that awful experience, I never would have learned what those kids' lives were like and learned from them.
You've obviously voiced the audiobooks. What was it like going through the whole book again in its entirety? Did it bring back things that you'd forgotten about at all?
I think every time any of us think about a journey that we've made, our brain gives us a little prod and says, oh, do you remember that bit? Into Africa, the first book, the first version of the manuscript was double the size of the book that actually ended up being published. It was massive because I'd allow my brain just to sort of nudge me with all of the different stories and so on. And then it was a case of going through and thinking, okay, well, that was interesting to me, but is it going to be interesting to anybody else? Getting ready to record the audiobook, that was a learning curve in itself. It's another adventure because there's a whole new experience, all of the skills and the talents and learning how to do it. It's not something that you can just sit down and do. So it was a new adventure, and yes, there were quite a few memories that came into my mind when I was getting ready for it. But when you're actually recording, no, you're fully focused on what you're doing.
You didn't start writing until, correct me if I'm wrong, but you didn't start writing until quite a few years later when you were still travelling through India, right?
Writing started when I was in India, you're absolutely right. By this time, Birgit was on the back of the bike for 3 months, and we rolled into what was salubriously called the Delhi tourist camp. And when I saw this thing, I thought, oh my goodness, it's going to be an Indian version of Butlins. This is going to be awful. But it was really conveniently located. so off we went, and we'd heard other travellers say that they'd stayed there. Now, I wanted to get a visa to go through Iran. And at that time, Maggie Thatcher had really teed off the Iranians. And so Brits were not very welcome in Iran. And getting a visa for Iran was a long, drawn-out process, which I felt was a little bit like being on the round, bobbly end of a yo-yo. But staying at the Delhi tourist camp, it was one of those crossroads because, pre-internet and forums and all of the rest of it, there were places that people who were overlanding went, be it with a Land Rover or a motorcycle or a bicycle or a truck, or it had to be somewhere that was safe to park up and that you would meet other people so you could swap advice and hints and tips about which was the best border crossing to go to and what paperwork you needed and what amazing road you'd come across that you just couldn't miss if you were heading in that way. All of those sorts of things. And every evening we would all gather together from our day's expeditions into the city or in the villages around the outskirts of the city. We'd be sitting drinking large bottles of Kingfisher beer. I can't remember what size they were, but let's say each one was about 1.5 litres in size. They were huge. Little bonfire, and in the background you'd see rats scurrying past you, and some of these rats were bigger than Western cats. They were huge things, but the focus was on the fire and swapping information and telling stories. And one night one of the girls said to me, "Sam, so many mad things happened to you. You should try writing some articles and share this." I thought, no, I got grade 4 CSE English at school, and my teacher told me that I'd only just got enough points to pass, let alone not fail, so I probably can't do this. But then that thought, if you don't try, you'll never find if you can, popped into my mind. So over the next days, I sat and had a go at writing some articles, and it was really done on what is anybody else going to find interesting about what's been going on. So it wasn't a case of me, and I. It was a case of the people and the places and the funny things that happened and, the stupid things that I did, the quirky observations, and weaving in some hints and tips. I put those in the post along with spare negatives and sent them off to the only motorcycle magazine in the UK that I had any knowledge of, as in the address still with me. Again, pre-internet. Motorcycle Sport and Leisure. I sent those off in the post to Motorcycle Sport and Leisure, and to my amazement, several weeks later, I got please, we'd like to take these, thank you very much letter. Could you send us some more as you're travelling? And so I wrote back to them. I said, this is absolutely awesome. Thank you very much. How much are you paying? And they wrote back and they said, well, not actually very much. But actually I didn't care because the whole point of writing the articles was to share. And the money did give me enough money to buy more rolls of film, which was fantastic because in many of the countries at that time, a roll of film was the equivalent in price of 3 days, 3 square meals. That was great opportunity just to take more pictures. So I was really happy, and that was where the whole writing side of things started.
After that, did you sort of keep a journal as you went along?
Yeah, I always write a journal. I think when anybody goes on a journey, whether it's a 2-week holiday, a 1-week bike trip to Scotland or whatever it may be, we're on intake overload. We are having an adventure because we've put ourselves somewhere that we've never been before, and it's full of experiences that we've not come across before. And so if we don't write a journal or some sort of notes as we go along, it's so often in one ear and out of the other because the brain just can't retain everything. So writing a journal at the end of the day, each day, was a really important thing to do. I know some people find it an incredibly daunting thought. Actually, you don't have to write reams. There are days when you want to, just because the stories and the memories are bumbling out of your mind. But on other days, just write keywords. 20 keywords, and that will spark the memories, and they will all come back to you. And so that's what I did. And I would never have been able to write the books had I not been writing those journals.
I hate to dwell on the negative side of things, Sam.
What?
But it's a good story. You had a fairly serious accident on your first trip through Africa, didn't you?
By the time I got down to Southern Africa, I'd decided that I was not going to go home at the end of the year. I'd really become a motorcycle travel addict, and I was thinking, this is the best way that I've ever travelled. I don't want this to end. And because I'd been wild camping, eating local food and that sort of thing, I still had a good wedge of money left. And then I discovered that actually, I could book myself and my bike on a container ship to go from South Africa to Australia, and I did just that. But roughly the same sort of time, I was hearing all sorts of wonderful stories from people who were coming towards Zimbabwe from Namibia and saying what a phenomenal country it was. And they sold me on the idea of going. So even though I'd got the ship clock, as it were, ticking on me, I decided to go. But everybody had warned me about this section of road called the Caprivi Strip. It was about 450 kilometres long, and everybody had said it's horrible. It's very pale or white sand, lots of soft sand, lots of deep corrugations, potholes, etc., etc. It's almost not travelled. So I was looking out for somebody to travel across with when I got to the edge of the desert track, and nobody. Absolutely nobody, and that clock was just going tick, tick, tick on me all of the time. And I thought, well, look, Sam, you've learned how not to fall off all of the time. You've learned how to ride on corrugations on sand, and you know how to dodge potholes and all of those sorts of things. You've got a huge petrol tank on the bike. You can map read. You can carry enough food. If you report in that you're going to go to the police station, then you report in at the other side. It'll be fine. Just take it steady. Be respectful, but not afraid. And so off I went. And I went in the dawn because that time of day the light was down low, so I could see the changes in the road surface. Where the corrugations were, they all had shadows. Where the potholes were, they had shadows. Where the sand texture changed, you could see it. And I was doing very nicely indeed until somebody in a 4x4 overtook me very fast, and nobody on dirt tracks does that. But he did. Don't know why, maybe an emergency, but he left me in a cloud of dust, and I didn't see a metre-deep hole in the road in front of me, and I drove straight into it. I woke up 4 days later in hospital with 17 bone fractures.
No.
But I was hugely lucky. And here goes that silver lining bit again. I was found within a few hours, and I was sitting unconscious on the edge of this hole in the road with a mangled motorcycle. I was found by 2 German holidaymakers who'd come off a side track, and they were travelling a day late because Edith had been feeling ill, so they hadn't joined this road on the day that they planned to. And Peter and Edith cleared out all of the stuff from the back of their truck that they possibly could. Edith washed the glass out of my eyes because my spectacles had fractured and filled my eyes with glass. The surgeon later told me from the scars on my eyeballs that had she not done that, I would be blind. They managed to get me in the back of their 4x4. And incredibly, after all of the days that I'd been sitting waiting at the beginning of this track for somebody to travel across, a truck turned up. They got my broken motorcycle on the back of this truck. And I went through 3 hospitals before the one that I woke up in. And I was told later that in 2 of them, my motorcycle had been on the wards next door to my bed because the medics were so concerned that things would have been stolen off it. And here's a little story of Africa. Nothing was stolen from my bike. None of my kits, none of the broken bits of bike, nothing. Everything went from one hospital to the next, and it was all there except for a piece of the fairing, which was just completely smashed. A piece of plastic about the size of a Coke bottle top was missing. There were 2 silver linings, and just so many more as a result of this. Very briefly, my bike was put back together by two local guys who lived in mud huts at the edge of the desert. One made things out of fiberglass, and his mate was a welder. And these 2 put my bike back together again. Oh, and I managed to book myself out of the hospital, which was a very dodgy place, and hitch a lift on a light aircraft from the local airport down to the capital city and get myself booked into hospital. The doctor, when he saw my x-rays, he came out with a big grin on his face and he looked at me and he said, yeah, these have got to belong to you. Do you want the good story or the bad side first? And yeah, well, of course I went with the bad, didn't I? Anyway, onwards. Silver linings, they rock.
What a crash that had done that to you. What had it done to the bike?
The front end of the motorcycle was a mangled piece of modern art. I did have a huge stroke of luck in that one of the things that I'd learnt about before I'd set off was common sense said to me, if I was going to put a 43-litre fuel tank on the front end of the bike, then the suspension that came with the bike wasn't going to be designed to deal with all of that weight. So I did some reading. I came across things called progressive fork springs. I put those in. I'm pretty darn sure that had I not had those springs in there, then the bike would have just mangled the forks completely. But as it was, what it did was the front end went in and then flipped me and the bike. So the forks, they were just twisted out of shape, but actually they were still true. They just needed everything putting back into shape. But all of the rest of the metal and the plastic and so on was in bits.
It's interesting to hear you talk about, the light hitting the contours and everything. And I was just reading in the back of Distant Suns where you give some advice and you talk about, I bet, Clive, you don't think about setting off early in the morning if there's sand to be ridden because there's more moisture in the sand and it's firmer.
Yeah, no, I always consider the level of... In fact, I carry a hydrometer around with me to test. Of course I fucking don't. Sam, 17 broken bones. That must have been quite a long recovery.
Well, it was 17 bone fractures. By the time I managed to get myself out of the hospital and hitchhike down to the hospital in Windhoek, a lot of the bones were already healing in the wrong place. So that was the bad news bit. Not that I'd got 17 fractures, but that they were going to have to break things and start all over again.
Oh, Jesus.
But, one of the silver linings there, and don't laugh too hard at me here, was
I love his attitude.
I'd never been in a Catholic hospital before. And that was when I discovered that some Catholic nun nurses are absolutely drop-dead gorgeous. You just got to look. But no, seriously, it took me 6 weeks before I could contemplate riding a bike again. And the biggest fear I had was when I throw my leg over the back of the motorcycle, because I didn't remember what happened with the accident. I didn't remember anything other than looking in my mirror on one of the rare occasions that I did and seeing this vehicle coming up fast behind me. I don't remember anything else about the accident, and I feared that I would get on the back of the bike and all of a sudden the memories and the pain would come back and then my trip would be over. And fortunately, my brain is the sort of brain that says, no, I don't want to remember that stuff. So I climbed on the back of the bike and I thought, oh, yes, this is where I'm supposed to be.
When you woke up this morning, are you still feeling any ramifications from these injuries, or are you completely healed in every respect? Do you still have a little twinge here and there or not?
Yeah, I do. During the 8 years, I slipped 3 discs in my lower back, and I'm going to pay the price for that. But physiotherapy, lots of walking, and positive thinking, and I do all right. I can't be the nut that I was on dirt roads anymore because I slipped 2 discs to begin with, and the doctors told me that I'd never ride a motorcycle again. I thought, what?
Challenge accepted.
That was exactly my attitude. And 3 months later, I was back riding. The 3rd disc that I slipped was in a very surprise situation. It was in South America. And you've heard about the winds in Patagonia. And a lot of Patagonia is gently rolling with no trees and very few buildings and so on. And so the first thing that wind hits is you on your motorcycle. But it doesn't blow constantly, it gusts. Almost as if an open hand is suddenly shoving you really hard and pushing you across the 2 lanes and trying to knock you off. Your day's riding is leaning into the wind, because it's that strong. If you don't, you'll just be tipped over. And then the wind drops, so you're yanking your bike upright, and you do this for hour after hour. My back started to feel quite painful with the 2 discs that I'd already slipped. I made the mistake of not stopping and not taking painkillers. I thought I could tough it out, and my body said, you're an idiot. And eventually I managed to slip the 3rd disc. But the silver linings from this were that Birgit and I managed to make it to a mountain town called Bariloche. And anybody who's ridden down through southern Argentina is more than likely to have been to Bariloche. It's almost like a ski town with lots of chalets and so on. And during the winter, it literally is a ski town. And during the summer, it's a major hiking centre. Lots of places for motorcycle travellers to go and stay. We reckoned if we could just make it there, and I was in significant discomfort, then we could probably find a sports physiotherapist who could give me a bit of a clue as to whether I just completely stuffed it or to give me some more exercises. And he gave me some more exercises, and he also gave me a prescription for anti-inflammatories. I didn't even know that such things existed. But in Argentina, you don't go to a doctor's to get injections that are given to you on prescription. You go to the pharmacist, and they have a room that's tucked to one side, and they have a nurse who comes and gives you the inoculations. In my case, I was told, go into that room over there and take a seat. So I went in and gently eased myself down onto the seat next door to the table. And the next thing I know, the room bursts open, and there's one of the biggest, most muscly women that I have ever seen. My instant thought was, good grief, I'm going to call you Olga the shot putter, because that was her build. Her biceps were bigger than my thighs. Anyway, she said to me, you, stand up. So I sort of gently eased myself up. She said, you, drop trousers. Yeah, okay. You, bend over.
It's Africa all over again.
And that was the next thing I know, is the needle was going in my backside, and moments later this flush of amazing warmth came over me. Olga the shot putter, she was great.
You were travelling for what, 6, 7, 8 years altogether?
8.5 years in total.
So I'm assuming you didn't have enough money saved up to travel for 8.5 years. Were you working your way around the world, or how did it work financially?
I sold everything that I'd got, house, car, furniture, clothes, whatever I could sell, I sold before I went. And I had the savings. I reckoned when I set off on this trip, look, you don't even know if you like riding a motorcycle.
We should probably explain what savings are to young people. That's when your income exceeds your expenditure and you can leave some of it in the bank.
And when you're tight and don't spend too much on stuff that you don't need. So I had all of that lot, and it was really a gamble. So I sold everything, working on the premise that if I make it halfway down Africa and I'm having an absolute ball and I'm doing this trip on my savings and I'm running out of savings, then I have to go home. Well, that's daft, because you may never be this free again. So put everything into the pot, and if you're not enjoying yourself, well, you can go home and you'll still have most of the money left. So it was a really good gamble that I did do that. I travelled on, living frugally from that time onwards, staying in some rock-bottom hotels and wild camping and all of that sort of stuff. I mean, I like the rock-bottom hotels because that's where you're meeting local people, not business people who are travelling through and staying in five-star jobbies. You're meeting the farmers and the school teachers and all of those sorts of people. But I was working as I travelled, typical backpackery type stuff, picking fruit and working on construction sites and, you know, all of those sorts of things. And at one stage, I was painting T-shirts and selling those to people who were climbing off cruise ships and those sorts of things. And there was one stage where I'd learned how to do embroidery thread braids in people's hair. So I was sitting doing that, and that was one of the reasons that Birgit and I got together, because I did her hair. And it was great. It was really good travel money. But the key reason for doing the jobs, other than trying to either not spend money because I was doing a job that got paid for accommodation and food, or because it gave me an opportunity to fill my coffers a little bit. The key reason was because it gave me the opportunity to get to know more about the local life. As travellers, we too easily travel across the surface of the places that we're travelling. And when you work somewhere, you're working with local people, and you get to know what those local people's lives are like, what their worries and their concerns, what makes them laugh. You get to learn about the politics, you get to learn more about the economy of the different places and so on. So they're absolutely fascinating things to do. But there's another key reason for working, and that is, I think that when we're on longer trips, we tend to get on intake overload and we start to become a little bit travel blind. And what I mean by that is we start thinking about the destination instead of stopping every 50 miles and enjoying everything that's going on along the way. And it's all of those things during the day that are the key reasons for being out on the journey in the first place. So when you stop and work somewhere for a couple of weeks, when you hit the road again, you're fresh. Because your brain's been dealing with completely different things, all of a sudden you've got more capacity to learn and absorb.
You've answered my question before I even asked it. Because I was going to say, was it easy to stop, or did you have that forward motion thing? But you're right, isn't it? We all get caught up in that.
True.
I mean, it's different if we've got 2 weeks away, but even then, I think we've got a friend at the moment who's travelling, who just today has taken this groundbreaking decision to not sort of continue with this forward motion and follow this route from A to B. He's going to stay in a certain area and just explore it. And when he told us that, I thought that's really unusual. None of us, we always talk about wanting to do that after we come back from a trip, but very few of us actually have the nerve to stop and spend some time in an area.
I think stopping's really important. For example, off the coast, the northeastern coast of Malaysia, there's a little group of islands called the Perhentian Islands. And these are tropical islands, palm trees, jungle, ground cover, but with white sand beaches and turquoise crystal clear water. You can't take your motorcycles out there. There are no cars. The sand is so soft that when you walk on it, the weight of your body makes it squeak, and you get little puffs of sand that come up around your feet. Having got off the boat, I was walking down this and heading for one of the little bamboo places that you could rent a room in. And I was thinking, this is awesome. This is me here in a place like this. And there were some other holidaymakers who'd come out for 2-week holidays. Not many, they were mostly over on the mainland, but there were some. And I thought, I may never, ever be in a place like this again. Why just stay for a couple of days? 3 weeks later, having seen all of the holidaymakers go, I thought, yeah, okay, let's go and see what's next. And that stopping in that place, well, you can tell how much joy and pleasure that I had out of that. Stopping in places is awesome. Explore properly.
I'm just looking at photographs on the internet of both Bariloche and the Perhentian Islands, and it's like, fucking hell. Both of them absolutely amazing in different ways, but yeah, phenomenal. Both places I've never heard of before.
That's
either.
the beauty of travel, hey?
Coming back to the work bit, Sam, how would you find work when you were travelling then? Would you literally just go and knock on doors and walk into shops and speak to people?
Exactly that. If I was going into a Western country, then I would make a point of staying in a backpackers hostel in an agricultural area, for example, because local farmers, they quite often put posters up on boards in those hostels saying help wanted. If there wasn't anything like that for me to find, then I'd go around and knock on doors and see if anybody had any odd jobs that needed doing, gardening or a bit of painting. One of the ways of getting free places to stay came from doing jobs, knocking on doors. Have you got any jobs? And then at the end of the day, you've done all of the jobs. I'm looking for somewhere to put my tent up. Can you recommend somewhere around here that nobody's going to be bothered with me putting my tent up overnight? And I'd get some cracking spots told to me down by rivers, for example. Sometimes people would say, no, just put your tent up in the back garden. Oh, hell no, come on, we've got a spare bedroom. Oh, those sorts of things. And so then when that happens, then you're seeing in somebody's home life. And that's really interesting. And people will share all sorts of things about life with you when they're within their own walls. And so the depth of learning is just wonderful. And you make friends, even though it's transient friends.
What sort of trips do you take now?
A lot shorter trips. Birgit and I always make a point every year of bunking off for a month somewhere on both our bikes. She's not riding her travel bike anymore. That was a 1972 BMW R60/5, which was called Sir Henry the Hybrid because it was made of so many parts from other motorcycles that it really was a hybrid. And Sir Henry, because he was a gentlemanly looking bike, but she didn't ride him anymore. He's retired. She found that the brakes were too shocking for everyday use, which made me laugh. We'd be going through Lima and things like that, and the traffic there is just a monster. But here in the UK, she'd be leaving space for stopping space in front of her, and somebody would be always driving into that. So she felt very uncomfortable. So she travels on her new bike, which is a 1984 R80 ST BMW. And the two of us bunk off. I'm still on Libby, my R80 GS. She's got 287,000 miles on her now. We head off and we go exploring for a month. We make a rough plan and then we just let the days make it up for us as we go. So we're still keeping that freedom of the road, travel, let's take advantage of opportunities style of riding. Other than that, I do trips because I'm about and about doing presentation tours and, those sorts of things.
With 280k on your BMW, is it very much Trigger's Broom or is it the original engine? How's that worked out?
Interestingly, bearing in mind the hell that I must have put that bike through for the first year in particular, I nearly burnt the clutch out trying to get over a wooden ridge in a mud hut. One day, the wooden ridge is there to stop water getting in, but they let my bike in. I could smell burning and I had no idea what it was as I was trying to get the bike back, be able to go over this ledge. Bearing in mind how much damage I must have done to the bike in the first year in particular, and then just general wear and tear, all of those miles of dirt and gravel and potholes and corrugations and my various fall-offs. She is remarkably reliable. She's still on the same pistons. The piston rings have been replaced, 5 or 6 times now. The compression's not perfect on one of them. A friend put a microscope, one of these flexi microscopes down inside to see what the bore was like. And he was smiling at me when he pulled it back out and he said, yeah, well, you can see why you've only got 80% compression on this one. The inside of it scored the hell. And I thought, yeah, I know where that's come from. I was doing the valve clearances one day, and it was a calm day. And I'd built my usual barrier around the bike when I was doing valve clearances, using panniers and chairs with cloths on and anything else that I could find. But I wasn't quick enough when the wind got up, and it literally did just suddenly blow. And I managed to get my T-shirt off and over the end of the cylinders, but not quickly enough. So I suspect that that's from there. But it just means that she's a little bit slower to start and she blows a little bit more smoke. But they're still there and they're still fine.
It's still on the same linings it's always had, same cylinders.
She's had new valve rockers because I wore those out. But the gearbox wasn't rebuilt until 200,000 miles.
This is very encouraging, Sam, because I've just bought fairly recently a 1980 R80.
Oh, great.
Which has done a whopping 40-something thousand miles.
Oh, awesome. It's the same thing with every single bike that we have. If you service it regularly and you keep your eyes open for the warning signs, as in that little oil spill, or something looking shiny where something shouldn't be shiny, yeah, pay attention to those warning signs. And on the trip, I was changing my oil, for example, at half distances, all of them, because I thought, well, I'm a mechanical idiot and I'm making this bike work hard in really hot conditions. So what can I do to try and help things along with it? Oil's cheap. Why didn't I just keep replacing that? And I'm absolutely positive that one of the reasons that she's going and doing as well as she is now is because of that constantly checking. You know, you do a day's dirt ride, and what do you do when you stop? You put the tent up, and while you're doing that, you put the billy on and make a cup of tea. When you've made your cup of tea, your campsite set up, and the next thing you do with your mug in your hand is you're walking around your bike and you're checking that everything's still tight and there are no warning signs. It just becomes habit. And finding those bolts that are beginning to work loose and getting them tightened up, that's where you stop the collateral damage happening, isn't it? But I'd like to name drop some guys, if I may, please, because I don't have a garage, and that means that I'm reliant on some friends for their garages and their BMW mechanical expertise and their tools. So Mark Manley, Dave Pape and John May in particular have all been absolutely fantastic with helping me keep Libby on the road and so on. You can imagine the great fun that we have working in their workshops. Large amounts of tea are drunk and lots of stories swapped. It's good fun. It's a social occasion.
I feel like we've barely scratched the surface of 8.5 years.
That's part one. Have we reached the end of part one?
I'd love to get you back on, Sam, and we'll dive into some more details. We really have scratched the surface, and we've not even talked about North America and Mexico yet. That is absolutely brilliant. I guess maybe something nice to finish on would be if you've got any words of wisdom for would-be world travellers, people that are just about to take off or would like to take off and do something similar.
Funny enough, I anticipated that you might ask. I've got some thoughts just written down. Some of them are quotes from other people, and there are some things that just have popped into my head. And the first is we've talked about this several times. If you don't try, you'll never find out if you can. That's absolutely a rule for the road. It's something to always have in your mind, because it's reminding you to find ways to say yes rather than find reasons why you shouldn't. And the more times you say yes, the more chances you are of going to having just fantastic adventures, which are going to stretch you, you're going to learn from, and which are going to open up opportunities. So if you don't try, you'll never find out if you can. The next one is an acknowledgement that all adventures begin when you start to dream. And dreams are something that we can all do, and it's then making those dreams turn into a reality. And I know for many people, they can't because they've got responsibilities, and I have full respect for people who take their responsibility seriously. The thought that's always in my mind is, what sort of world would we live in if people didn't take their responsibility seriously? But I do love people who say, I can't go yet, because that word yet is leaving that door very firmly open. So all I can say is keep those adventure dreams happening, because one day your chance will come. I really hope it does. This next one is a quote from Maya Angelou, and she's an absolutely fascinating lady. If people haven't heard of her, then start looking up her name for her quotes. So Maya Angelou, that's Angelou. This is one that just fits life as a whole, but particularly travelling. Life is not measured by the breaths we take, but by the moments that take our breath away. Isn't that just so true?
And that's probably why you've called your compilation books, of which there are 2, The Moment Collectors.
That's exactly right. Exactly right. That's what we do in life, isn't it? When we're, and when we're on a trip, we're collecting moments, we're collecting memories, we're collecting those things that stand out to us, and we're thinking, oh yes, this is exactly why I'm out here. And those moments, they're really special. So yeah, the 2 books, The Moment Collectors and The Moment Collectors Asia. The next one, and I like this one because I am a mechanical idiot and I am a bit of a disaster magnet. You guys have probably picked up on both of those things quite clearly by now. But those who never make a mistake have never tried anything new. Those who never make a mistake have never tried anything new. And it's so good to remember that, isn't it? Because we are all going to stuff up when we try something new. And sometimes we're just really lucky, aren't we? And it works. And fantastic. But how many times do we try something new and we do cock it up? But actually the point there is, it's like falling off your bike on a particular road condition for the first time. What do? Heave your bike back up, climb on and off you go. No, you take a moment to think about what you did wrong. And then pick your bike back up, climb on it, and try not to make the same mistake again. This last one, the travel bug bites hard, but motorcycle travel bites deep. It's infectious. I think that's why there are so many of us, aren't there? We're all kindred spirits because we know that.
Well, that was an absolute treat. What a delightful man. As everybody says, he is the nicest man in adventure motorcycling, and he did nothing to dispel that rumour in that conversation we've just had with him. We recorded for about an hour and a half, and the time absolutely flew by, and we could have talked for an awful lot longer. And Sam, the invitation's there. Please come back and talk to us again soon. You should hopefully have heard an advert for Sam's books, but I do thoroughly recommend them all. He is a great writer, and it's a lovely way of experiencing adventure motorcycling vicariously. Well recommended. That's it for this week. See you next time. Thanks for listening. We really appreciate your support. Don't forget you can follow us on Facebook and Instagram. And if you really appreciate what we do, you could consider supporting us on Patreon or buy us a coffee. Links are available on our website, which is tampodcast.com, tampodcast.com, where we also have a limited selection of branded stuff. But either way, please keep listening and spreading the word. See you next time.